Well, good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, September 20th, 2021. I'll now call this meeting to order. And our first item of discussion is the Cedar Falls Economic Development Corporation. A discussion on that scheduled to last 20 minutes for our time budget. And to start us off tonight, for city staff, do we have a preamble for this? Okay. So, Mr. Shane Graham, Economic Development Coordinator for the city.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to introduce Jim Brown with the Cedar Falls Economic Development Corp. Just a little background. So city staff has had some discussions with Jim and some of the other co-founders of the Cedar Falls Economic Development Corporation over the past several months, looking at ways that they can help benefit Cedar Falls in connection with what city staff does. We've also been talking with Grow Cedar Valley as well and discussing kind of what role this Economic Development Corp can play in connection with both city staff and what we do, and also with what Grow Cedar Valley does. We've had some discussions with the three of us kind of determining what roles each of us play and things like that. And so with that, I will let Jim Brown come up. He's going to give a presentation on kind of what they are asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shane. Council, Mayor, and staff, it's great to be in front of all you folks this evening. As you know, there's 3 or 4 slides I'd like to go through real briefly. It's more to keep me straight than anything else, but obviously I'll move through this and offer and ask for any questions thereafter. So this first slide's indeed back in July of this year, we had some folks get together and create the Cedar Falls Economic Development Corporation. I'll refer to it the CFEDC or maybe just the EDC this evening, just this afternoon, in relation to how some things can be explained, maybe how things can get answered. Some of the founding members are also here in support as well. I'll mention Carrie here in a moment as well, and talking about partnerships. But I'll say this: the city of Cedar Falls has, an incredible history of success, and we're not here to challenge that success. We just simply believe that an EDC better positions the city and our community for success in the future. So with that, when it first got started, our conversations did evolve around roles, responsibilities, and partnerships. That's why I'm here this evening with you to discuss the most important partnership that we could have as far as what the city is concerned. Shane mentioned, and the mayor mentioned, his role as the manager of economic development. He is a great professional, he's a fantastic planner, and he's very busy. We don't see his role changing in the traditional economic development that he would be in control of or process through. If we get a lead from the outside, they contact the city, they may want to build another distribution center in the industrial park. Shane's the guy, obviously, working with staff and moving that thing as he has the last number of years. Where we would see an economic development corporation come alongside there would be what I call soft sales. We have a great diverse board that we're developing right now, but these folks involved could come along for interviews or bring along parallel organizations to help that new company come in, feel welcome, tour the town, the schools, whatever the case might be. There's some voids just by the very nature of Shane's position, as he's been here, I think, 3 or 4 years, and that's where I believe that the Cedar Falls Economic Development Corporation can come in and help fill those voids. One is the existing retention, talking to existing businesses, letting them know what's going on and letting them know what to Shane what's going on with their company and vice versa. And we also will be bringing our own various leads into the city with our efforts. And of course, if and when that happens, we will contact Shane first. So all in all, his role's not going to change. We hope to take a look at that and see it as being value added. The other partnership, crucial, I mentioned before, is Grow Cedar Valley. And again, Carrie is here, the director. You know her very well. This is also a crucial partnership that we look for. And I'll tell you mainly why is the people ability that they have, the connections they have to the Cedar Valley, through the state with peer groups and with Des Moines. Carrie is fantastic at having incredible relationships that we can help bolster, come alongside once again, and hopefully influence from time to time as it relates to what she has done, what she has produced over the years. Lisa Schoolbowl, we've been in contact with her. She is an award-winning economic development professional with Grow Cedar Valley. Great technical expertise for what she can bring to the table. Of course, she handles the entire Cedar Valley, so as it relates to specific Cedar Falls development, once again, we can utilize and partner with her as well in that effort. I'll point to a recent poll that the Grow Cedar Valley did to its members earlier this year. They asked their members, what are you looking for in Grow Cedar Valley? And they came back with a number of different responses, but the top three that rose to the top was collaboration, and again, they're perfect for that. Be a resource for the business community in the Cedar Valley, and workforce development. None of those are in conflict with what the CFEDC is looking to do as far as bring things forward. There's other partnerships as well. We have had some informal conversations with them. Some we haven't yet, but they're going to be in play, I think, as time progresses there. You can see Community Main Street, the county, Intercog, College Hill Partnership, our friends in Waterloo. All of those are going to require some partnership and some collaboration. We see the cost now for the city as it relates to funding part of Grow Cedar Valley, Community Main Street, and College Hill Partnership not changing. In fact, we can probably see it increase, but not from the normal area of as far as support, but just in terms of the work that can be done through an EDC. The next bullet is our nonprofit status provides grant funding and tax management assistance enabling projects not otherwise possible. This is huge. If you look at surrounding communities, and what I mean maybe 3 or 4 hours away, they're doing great things with their economy. They all have an economic development corporation. One of the main reasons for that, and the many benefits thereof as far as the IRS and the tax code, is the nonprofit status they bring to the table. I'll also point to the strategic plan continuation. I know all you folks are familiar with the 2025 plans, 2015, 2016. Fascinating to read through that with my hat on now as I'm helping do some work with the CFEDC. I'll point to two things in there that I read. One was the term implementation. For the folks here, the folks before you who came here, folks, some aren't here anymore with us and some are kind of off in the distance in the sunset. There's an incredible amount of success with different goals that are associated with the strategic plan. And we're not going to agree on all the different plans there, all the different goals. But what Cedar Falls has done so well is plan accordingly for the future. And if you look at the success there, there's a lot of kudos to be given. One example is in that document from 7-8 years ago is to have a river improvement project. Kudos to you folks for having that final go through the last couple meetings ago. The other thing I'll point out is the collaborative effort for that strategic plan. None of that would have been done if it wasn't for the collaborative effort of you and I, Grow Cedar Valley, Cedar Falls Schools, the City of Cedar Falls, the business community, volunteers, all that is supporting what then would have been the future planning and what now is actually happening throughout the community. So the specific work for the CFEDC. We do have plans for specific work, bringing in economic development leads. We obviously have great things to brag about in our community, from the broadband to the quality of life, the education, the secondary and the post-secondary opportunities. When these kind of leads come in, our conversations, again, with Shane and Carrie, is that when these leads come in, our first person we call is Shane. He is the expert in the planning. He is the expert in the timing. He is the expert as far as moving that project from point A to point Z. We will pick up some of the existing Cedar Falls business visits, the regional dollars for state and federal grants. There is money in Des Moines right now through what's called the IEDA, Iowa Economic Development Authority, that our taxpayers in Cedar Falls send their taxes to, and it's not a bad thing. They award dollars for various projects at the state level, tens of millions of dollars. Last year, there was $100 million available for not just a city. In fact, they're very keen on making sure it's not just a city, it's a region. Well, the Des Moines area got 75 of that 100 million, and the Cedar Rapids area got 25 million of that 100 million. We're not getting those dollars, and I think, again, the collaborative effort to bring teams together and bring people together could really, right there, be an outstanding return on investment that you can look forward to in the upcoming years. I mentioned our nonprofit status. We are a 501c4, and the official designation with the IRS is its advocacy. So we're advocating for the economic development in Cedar Falls. The next bullet shows our goal: 15 entities or individuals to give $10,000 for a total of 150. I wasn't paying attention when I first submitted this because I was reminded, I mentioned before, we filed all our paperwork July 1st of this year, and July 13th, they said, okay, Jim, go see what kind of interest we have. Our goal is 10 entities or businesses to give $10,000 for $100,000. We did that in just over 2 weeks. I say that because the response we have received from the community has been fantastic, and where money is being spent is really where you get the strongest support. But we'll stick to the 15 entries at the $150,000. Our we're requesting the city tonight, this afternoon, match the dollars there. It's already in the existing budget. It's neutral expenses for the taxpayers, and it's for the benefit of the entire city. The next slide is kind of a fun slide as conversations have commenced. The potential projects for the CFEDC can range from a single-family lot to large-scale development. And I'll just put a caveat out. There's been no formal discussions with these entities. There's been some informal discussions, just sharing with them the same thing I'm sharing with you this evening. So nothing is ironclad here. But we know within the community, if folks are paying attention, there's usable land coming from the school district and the hospital. There's state and federal roads funds opportunities. We're kind of piggybacking there with the federal funds that might be coming through for infrastructure and such. The Thunder Ridge future plans, that was in the Courier a few weeks ago. College Hill development, I spoke personally to President Nook and Randy Pilkington. They're thrilled to increase the potential collaboration between the EDC and the city and all the other stakeholders involved. Affordable housing options and downtown. And I hate mentioning a few of those, but to be clear that there's no boundaries within development of the four walls of Cedar Falls. If there's a project out there, whether it be a single lot a couple blocks over or some project at the edge of town, doesn't have a designation to where it's at, we'll go there and see if there's opportunities. So we are requesting this evening that council agree to match the $150,000 currently raised and pledged with the CFEDC. These funds will come out of the already budgeted amount for the Economic Development Fund. That fund was established about 4 years ago, $150,000 in it, and it hasn't been used. We don't want to drain it all, so that's why we're coming to you for a split between the two fiscal years, $75,000 now and $75,000 July 1st of 2022. What we really hope to do, folks, is in the future, again, going back to the planning, if folks in 25 years from now can see some amazing results at the city as a whole, I'd like to hope they point to the CFEDC that got established and say, those are some great ideas that we did, and here's some things we can point to that were successful because of and in tune with various organizations. Just as right now, we can look back 25 years ago and say, boy, some people made some great decisions back then in their planning to create this industrial park and to create broadband, the world's best internet at every doorstep. That's what we hope happens in the future based on our planning and success in the past. Open for questions, if you will allow that, Mayor, or any other discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So we'll open up for council questions and discussion. I'll start off with a question, Mr. Brown. For other examples, like say Marion, I understand has an economic development corporation, and of course Waterloo does as well. Can you give any examples of projects you've been inspired by they're working on that you'd like to kind of duplicate here?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the question. The Waterloo Development Corporation is a little bit different animal. They actually get sustainable funds from the gaming from 20, 25 years ago. So they're actually able to come to the table and buy property. And you can see that, I don't know the street, but it's down there by the Sportsplex and the bank and the beer joint. And so they're able to go in, buy those out, and say, city, here's your lots, go do something with that. So they're a little bit different structured that way. You mentioned Marion, that's Medco, the Marion Economic Development Corporation. They are very similar to what we would like to do here. They are the operating arm of the city's economic development. They're in the hallway, in the same building, and they're down the hallway, so that they are the arm of what's happening there. I'll give you one example of a current developer that's doing a project down in Marion, and it goes back to one of the first things I mentioned, the nonprofit status of an economic development corporation. So within this development, there might be 4 buildings that are a part of what the person or developer is looking to do, and maybe that 4th building is a library, and maybe it got destroyed by a derecho storm. So if the developer wants that to be part of the overall development down there, the developer can spend $1 million for that library. Well, they might as well get $1.5 million out of the bank because the IRS changed their tax code. It's going to cost an extra $500,000 just in taxes before the shovel's in the ground, or in this case, a brick is removed. So that nonprofit library gives, contractually, the Economic Development Corporation that building. The Economic Development Corporation works alongside that developer. They talk with each other. What's it going to take? How long is it going to take? How much investment's involved? And so when it's all said and done, they'll have a predisposed contract, and that's when the developer spends the money to acquire that piece of property. Now they're making cash flow. Now that maybe they're selling parcels, whatever the case might be. It's an incredible tool that we don't have in Cedar Falls. I think it'd be a great benefit.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Councilmember DeBoer?
I have a question, one for staff and then one for Jim. The question to staff is the $75,000 that was in the CIP, has that already been promised or set to be used for something else?
Not at this time. As you know, we're very early in the fiscal year, so as we worked with Mr. Brown, we asked that the ask be over the 2-year time period, so we still have $75,000 in that economic development fund. And those are really for funds things that are unforeseen as we go through the course of the year. Is there a developer that comes to town that we need to help them with, or are there conferences or those type of things that we can do to promote economic development within the community?
So would the use of this cause us to be short on something else that we would need like that, or would that just come from another funding source?
I don't believe it would. As Mr. Brown said, we've had this in the funding for 4 years. We have used some of it throughout the course of the year, but we've never used all $150,000.
Gotcha. And Jim, did you expect it to be again then a third year, or were you just looking for the 2 years?
It's a great question. One key factor we looked at early on was sustainability. And so I've moved the goal up to find 20 individuals to give us $10,000. The response has been that solid. We'll stick to the 150 here, though, of course. If we have this match with the private-public partnership, there's $300,000. There's another public entity in town we haven't spoke to formally. We'd like to have that get matched as well. So there's $450,000. As we've talked through a very rough budget, we'll get in more detail as more of our board meetings take place. That's pretty sustainable for 2 or 3 years. So from our successes, from potential other funding sources, grants and such like that, we don't look for any more asks, but I can't promise we wouldn't be back for an ask.
Councilor Cruz?
Thank you. This is for staff, I guess. Economic Development Fund, will there be a replenishing mechanism, or what's the formula that we fill it back up, or do we hit a certain level where we stop filling it, so to speak? Or
So actually, that's an annual budget item. So if it's not used, it goes back into the fund, or if it is used, the next year it's replenished at the beginning of the fiscal year, so to speak.
we try to keep it at 150.
Well, every year at the beginning of the year, now as projects come up and as we spend that, but every year it's replenished, so to speak.
The council's approving it at 150
Yeah.
each. Other questions?
This would not duplicate the work of Gross Cedar Valley, of any of the other entities that the city is already, I don't want to say, it has support for. It would not duplicate the work that they do, correct?
Correct.
It would be collaboration.
We look at it collaborative and value added. As mentioned before, the Shane's great work that he does. I'll put it this way, roughly 70% of a community's growth each year comes from existing businesses. And so the scheduling to, as you might imagine, to get a hold of, I think we have 125 businesses in Cedar Falls, is a huge task for any one person, especially if they're a great planner and they manage economic development. So that's value added that we see. I don't know if I mentioned, but we also plan, as we've talked with staff, to have weekly development meetings with staff. So folks get together, tell them what's happening, tell them there's maybe some shortcomings here. The staff can inform them what's happening, whether it be for the road funds from DC or the IEDA money from the state. I think communication's been decent, but it can certainly be improved. So again, another value added, among other things that we hope to bring to the table.
Councilor Miller, you had a question or comment?
It was much along the same lines. I guess I'm a little concerned over time that our relationship with Gross Cedar Valley dwindles, I guess, if you will. And that collaboration, say you guys go out and find a business, bring them to Cedar Falls, how does that collaboration work with Grow Cedar Valley? Because they do a heck of a job at this point, tracking all those numbers, seeing and staying and keeping that communication going. So is there, how is that communication going to work, I guess? in that
Sure.
role?
We'll have regular meetings with them as well, Councilman. We've talked about that. There is a, I'm not going to remember the acronym, but when there is an instance, if I go call an ABC business, I'll let Shane and Lisa know that's what I'm doing. They may give me some input as far as the real world that maybe Lisa talked to them 2 years ago, Shane, that sort of thing. So it's just a tracking system, much like in any, sort of sales organization. As you, the goal is to talk with them. The goal is to get companies to come in. From that point forward, it's a teamwork effort. Whoever, you don't worry about who gets credit, it's going to be successful. And we've had some good conversations because that was early concerns from some of our early founders, not to duplicate, but to come alongside, collaborate, and keep everybody informed. So I will say this, and I'm not sure if I stressed it enough. Maybe I mentioned CFEDC so much, but these relationships, partnerships I mentioned before, from the county to Intercog, Waterloo, everything else, those are invaluable to Cedar Falls, because again, the return on investment is to get maybe some of these grant dollars from Des Moines and such. But make no mistake about it, as that funnel kind of moves down and moves through the work that's being done on a regular basis, it's for Cedar Falls. The EDC is for Cedar Falls. The rest, obviously, is added benefit and added value.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Cyrus.
Well, I just got a couple short questions. Shane, how much is in your budget? Don't you have a budget that we use for economic development and that kind of thing?
That's the 150,000. That,
And doesn't he have a budget, and isn't that what he's supposed to do, is bring in economic development?
so his budget, the economic development budget, is the $150,000, but there are some additional things, salary, wages, all of the other thing that other employees have. But typically, the budget's at $150,000.
Won't this be duplicating what we already have? That's my question. Because we have Shane as economic development.
Is that a question to me or Mr. Brown?
Oh, doesn't make any difference, whoever wants to answer it.
Sure. Well, with what I mentioned before, as far as the potential duplication, we don't think it's there because of the workload involved. I would think, as I've thought about this, if you look in the past, the present, and the future, in the past, as of 3 years ago, for 30 years, we had a guy on staff named Bob. Everyone knew Bob, and from starting the industrial park all the way through all the other development in the city, everyone knew who to contact for whatever reason, because Bob had actually put him in place there. Bob departed, and Shane came in a year or so after that. And so now we have the present. And I don't care who it is, you can't replace a Bob with 30 years of experience going through the records, going through his mind, going through the relationships that he has with all those individuals. You combine that, at least with, again, my example here of the present, is that we also have COVID that took place, and we also have the work, the incredible work you folks are doing with the rezoning for parts of the community. That's going to be restrictive, I think, no matter who's in the job of Cedar Falls Economic Development Management. So looking forward, as I mentioned a few times, I think will be value added into the future, because we will work with the city, but not be a part of the city. I think that's a key distinction in relation to not duplicating, but coming alongside.
Okay, no other questions? Councilor Cruz?
Just curious, will your projects involve TIF and various other promotional sort of things?
I would assume some or most would, Councilman, and that's, to be quite candid with you, even though I was, around for a few years, sometimes that TIF goes over my head as well. That's why if and when we get a lead, the first person I'm calling is Shane, because he knows the ins and outs of those things. And that's the other side of the partnership, where clearly Shane's going to be a great help to us, as is Lisa. She's got an incredible technical knowledge. If you need this much water, you better plan on that much sewer kind of thing. She knows those back and forths there. So I'm looking forward to working with them and ultimately, furthering things along.
Okay, well, we're at about our time budget for this item.
I just had one
Certainly, Frank.
comment, regardless of what we decide here tonight. you know, I'm all about goal setting. I'd like to suggest that we continue this discussion at goal setting and talk in terms of what Cedar Falls' relationship is with your organization, with Grow Cedar Valley, and any other kind of, what I liked about what you're talking about is regional development. And Cedar Falls needs to view ourselves as more part of a larger region. And I think this is a great first step, but, you know, if we're approving this tonight, I still have questions about our funding for Grow Cedar Valley, and I want to make sure that going forward, we're clear on relationships and benefits and who pays for what. And so this is more of a kind of a pre-referral to goal setting, but I think it'd be a healthy discussion to have at that time.
Okay. And as I understand from Committee of the Whole, what we're allowed to do tonight is have the consensus or have the motion forward to go to council. So it wouldn't be a final approval tonight for this. Is that correct, Mr. Rogers? Yeah, so this still would need to go before council for official approval, but am I hearing a consensus, or is there a motion that you'd want to bring forward? Yes, Councilor Cyrus?
I agree with Frank. I think this should be pushed down the road to goal setting.
I do have a question. If
Certainly.
Councilman Darrow was talking about conversing and funding and then conversing, or conversing at goal setting and then funding?
I think whatever action we take tonight is fine, but I think it's a larger discussion that we need to have going forward. Economic development is a very competitive animal, and the more we can understand where we're headed with it, what the city's role is, what our private partners' roles are, I just think that's healthy. So I'm just more referring it, and not to delay the decision, but to further investigate moving forward. I know we have to decide how we fund Grow Cedar Valley as well, and I trust that this isn't going to diminish that. But having that
Correct.
whole discussion, this is new for us, sounds great, but let's make sure we're doing it right and continue the discussion in a more formal goal-setting fashion.
I'm very certain that whatever could be brought to the table at goal setting, the partnership and relationships we have there with the ongoing conversations we have now would easily be handled and be welcome to that.
We'd know more by goal-setting time, too.
Sure.
Okay, so I would entertain any motions that the council might have for now. Councilor Dwyer?
Sorry, this is funding that you need to get started.
Correct.
Correct. So if they did the first year of the 75,000 and then did the second year under the goal setting to appease their thoughts down there, would that create a hardship for your group?
I don't think a hardship. I think that might be a fair compromise just in relation to the timing associated with that.
I'd make a motion that we do the 75,000 now and then consider it goal setting, the 2022, extending that 75,000 as well through goal setting.
Okay, it's been motioned to allow the 75,000 now and consider 75,000 at goal setting. Is
I'll
that-
second that.
Okay, it's motion and seconded. Any further discussion for that?
Just for staff, a clarification, if we're voting on that motion, is it going to come back to council for approval again, like we were talking about, or are we just,
That mechanism, that $75,000 expenditure would come back to the city council for that.
So in our next meeting is a resolution?
Yes.
Okay.
The caveat that I'll always put on there, and I think Mr. Brown's tired of hearing me say this, but this is public money, this is taxpayer money, so we got to make sure that there's a public purpose involved. And so we will have those conversations and continue to make sure that these dollars, the $75,000, is used for that public purpose.
I would add, Mayor, that I assume there's going to be some sort of agreement reached, some kind of contract for this money too. So that would be before council as well to approve a contract.
Okay,
that helps out a lot. Okay, thanks.
excellent. Any other discussion? So motion and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that does pass. Thank you, Mr. Brown. So we'll bring that up for probably our next council meeting with looking to a contract or an agreement for that initial 75,000. Second item that we have tonight is political campaigning on city property. We have originally 30 minutes set for that, And City Attorney Kevin Rogers will open us up for that discussion.
Thanks, Mayor, Council. We're here tonight. I passed out in front of you Administrative Policy number 11. That's what's under discussion. You turn to the second page. I think it's under item 11 is the provision that we're talking about. I want to make sure everyone had that one in front of them. I'll read it for the benefit of the people watching. It says that city meeting facilities and the grounds for those facilities may not be used for political campaign purposes. However, the following activities may be held. A, candidate debates or forums that are open to the public may be held in such facilities or grounds as long as at least 2 candidates seeking the same office are invited to attend the debate or forum. And B, precinct caucuses and caucus education or training may be held in city meeting facilities where other public meetings are allowed. Caucus education or training may not include fundraising or other campaign work and may not include advocacy for or against a ballot issue. So that's the administrative policy we're talking about this evening. This, I should point out that I know the issue came up in regard to parks, but it also applies to all other meeting facilities in the city. I want to make that clear. Also, it's an administrative policy. I want to explain that a little bit. Administrative policies are adopted by staff as guidance to implement ordinances and regulations, resolutions passed by council. So it's more a directive for staff in proceeding forward. In this particular case, the direction is when considering a permit for instance, a park shelter, the direction to staff is not to issue the permit for a political campaign. And there are other types of administrative policies that have been adopted, and they cover lots of things. There's 26 of them, as a matter of fact, and they cover things like some things mundane as pesticide application, certain purchasing, cash management, investments, banners, litigation hold, public records, more administrative stuff like that. This particular administrative policy is interesting in that members of the public are also affected by staff decisions, because if a permit application is denied for a meeting at a park shelter, for instance, that affects a member of the public. And generally, council doesn't get involved in administrative policy making, except for one. You're all aware of administrative policy number 7 that governs council's own procedure for these meetings. And council did, we just amended those recently, and so council will weigh in on those. That's really the only exception. You might wonder, okay, if it's administrative policy, how is it enforced? And this particular policy is enforced in terms of someone makes an application for a permit to hold a meeting in a park shelter. That permit application is denied. There's an ordinance that says that you shall not have a meeting in a public area without a permit. So they'd be there without the permit. That's the enforcement mechanism. I want to talk about the origins of this because it's important to find out how we got to where we are and then what council can do about it if it wishes to make a change. Iowa Code Section 68A.505 prohibits the expenditure of public funds for political purposes. And so that's statutory. What's important about that is a statutory violation of that statute constitutes misconduct in office. So office holders such as yourselves pay pretty close attention to that and make sure that we don't run afoul of that statutory directive. It says public monies, obviously that would be taxpayer money, and in this instance that could include funds used to purchase area for a park. It could involve maintenance of park areas and shelters. It could involve public money used to pay the salary of people maintaining park shelters. So one could argue this is all public money supporting these park shelters. State regulations weigh in too. So I told you about the statute. There's state regulations that say, and it mirrors it pretty much. I'm going to read it. It says, cities may not permit public resources to be used to advocate for or against a candidate or for or against a ballot issue. So it's very clear, not only in the statute, but in the regulations, that public monies aren't to be so used. There's a big however. There's an exception in state regulations that say candidate forums are okay. That's why the administrative policy includes those. It also includes the following provision, and this is what has led to some confusion about implementation of this. I'll read it for you. This is an exception to no use of public money for political campaign purposes. It says, a person may reimburse a governmental body for the use of a public resource for a political purpose so long as it can be demonstrated to the board, use board loosely there, that the use of the resource was also for a public purpose or furthered a public interest. What does that mean? A lot of cities ask themselves what that means. Does the exception swallow the rule all of a sudden and it's wide open to use political or public monies for political purposes? And therein lies sort of the wiggle room, and that's the wiggle room I'm going to tell you about in a little bit. And what the Iowa Ethics and Campaign Disclosure Board states, based upon that language, is that cities could allow its facilities to be used for political campaigns on the same basis they're used by other members of the public. According to the Ethics and Campaign Disclosure Board, it would be acceptable to do so. According to the Iowa League of Cities, cities take various approaches to this. Some allow it, some don't. So I say all that to tell you that if council wishes to make a change in the administrative policy, it is okay to do so. It's my understanding, however, that it's been a long-standing practice in Cedar Falls not to make public facilities available for political campaign purposes. So what this policy does is implements long-standing practice. I wasn't around when this originally was developed, but I assume it has to do with Cedar Falls having a lot of parks and a lot of parks in residential neighborhoods. And political campaign rallies might have been thought to be inconsistent with the use of the park itself and maybe neighbors around parks in those residential areas. So now this has come up, council wanted to have a look at this, and so there are different ways council might wish to approach this. I told you about the enforcement mechanism. Council could leave it alone, or council could direct staff to amend Administrative Policy 11 to allow political campaign use on the same basis as other members of the public, or council could even take a direct approach and direct staff to come back with an ordinance specifically addressing this. I think any one of those options is available to council should it wish to address this issue. Again, it can leave it alone, and it could be enforced through that Code of Ordinances section I said, that if you're denied a permit and you go have a meeting at a public park, that would be a violation of the ordinance. That would be a municipal infraction. So far as I know, no one's been issued a municipal infraction for this. And so I know there's been some public awareness of this, and so I understand why council wants to discuss this and have a look at it. I'm here to take questions if you have any.
I think Mr. Rogers is open for council discussion. Anyone want to start us off? Councilmember DeBoer?
Well, it certainly seems with COVID that we're going through, using parks seems to be a very good idea, so that we're outside and can social distance. Just a question. If a person were to add item C, where we have A and B, which are exceptions, If you had a C that simply said city parks are allowed for political campaign purposes, and you put a time limit on it, like say from August and November from noon to 8 p.m. so that they couldn't go late into the evening, would that be a possible solution?
So you can say yes all the way, you can say no all the way. I take that to mean you could go somewhere in between, for sure.
Because that way, it would still, city meeting facilities and the grounds are two separate things to me. A meeting facility might be to use the visitor center versus the grounds means a park. So that's why I was wondering if just adding a C where we're specifically saying that the parks are okay, but they're again limiting it to a certain time period, so.
That's a possibility.
So it's allowed. Councilor Harding?
I could see what Susan's saying, especially with COVID. You know, it's a good place to meet. It's out in the open right now. So, but I wouldn't want to really open it up to, you know, to national politics, just because I feel like that would run counter to what some neighborhoods would want. So could would it be appropriate to say for city campaigns, or we could word where it's for using the grounds or using a park for city stuff only, and not, how is that possible, or how would we word that? I just worry that if we open it up for all politics, that, you know, national politics, we could have the parks full and very unhappy neighbors.
I don't think that's a classification. I think that classification could be problematic because you would have local campaigns. Well, what about state house races? I mean, there are constituents in Cedar Falls that would be voters in that race. Same with statewide, same with federal. So that classification there would be problematic from an equal protection standpoint, I think.
Okay, that makes sense. To follow that up, could we just put an exception for COVID and then end it when COVID's over?
You can adopt and revoke it as you see fit.
Yeah.
I would add something to my previous comment, though.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a reasonable classification to say that, you know, only campaigns where, you know, residents of Cedar Falls would be a constituent, like Delaware governor race. I think we could deny our parks to those people. Not that they want to use them anyway, but
Yeah.
that would be reasonable.
I know. I start thinking about possible 2024 elections and huge campaign rallies in all our parks and things like that, and neighbors just being not happy about it, because it can, you know, if you're living right there, it could be crazy. So if you open that door, it's just one of those things where it's like, how far do you want to open it? And so that's why I was wondering if we could just limit it, because I don't necessarily have an issue with a city person utilizing it for their ward, especially in this time with COVID, but I would have some issues possibly with some national politics, just, you know, having a 300, 400 person rally out there, you know.
I do think that if it's a come one, come all, I believe that it would require a public event permit process as well, and that goes through various city departments to make sure crowd control and emergency evacuations, things like that. So there'd be somebody looking at that. But quite frankly, the way we operate is first come, first serve on those facilities. And so if it's a big national political campaign and they're there first, they're going to get first shot at it.
Thanks.
Mayor.
Councilor Miller?
Kevin, where's that line again then? So if local residents are constituents, so then you're opening it up to the state level as well?
I'd say
And federal.
local board of supervisors, so
Yep.
county,
Sure.
state, and federal,
Yeah.
presidential, our congressional district.
Could we just strike all of number 11?
Sure can.
Because really, you know, that's how democracy was started, was a soapbox, and the First Amendment is so important. And I'm curious, who complained on the campaigns? Because I didn't think there was really any problem.
There hasn't been a problem because it's, as far as I know, everyone's always complied with this. So it hasn't, but so let's not get confused about the First Amendment here. So So if a candidate want to go over in the park and start talking about stuff, certainly that's their First Amendment right. It's the meeting facilities, using city facilities for meetings is where what this is addressed to.
So if you didn't sign up, then you could just go over there and start talking and people would show up.
Yeah, if I could go over there and literally get my soapbox and stand up, start talking, people start listening. They haven't arranged for a meeting now. However, if I'm going to put something in the paper that, hey, let's meet at Piper Park at 3 o'clock, that's a meeting, that's where you'd invoke this section. I know it's a difficult line sometimes to figure out, but meeting is an intent to get together. If someone just stepped on a street corner and started talking, that's not a meeting. There's no prearranged people coming together in that circumstance.
Yes,
I'm
Councilor
going to
Dunn?
plead ignorance, and I'm going to be honest. And during a time of COVID, and I've been, I guess, in this arena during that whole time, I've met with people in the park because how else, I didn't know about this, so I will plead ignorance, but how else do you safely engage with folks during a pandemic when you're not supposed to be, especially a year ago, when you're not supposed to be inside together unmasked. So I will just tell you that from my experience, it's usually like 1 or 2 people that show up. And for instance, last time I talked for 2 hours with somebody about our Met Transit and how that could be improved. I mean, I get the intent and I get that we need to prepare for anything that could happen, but it seems in my experience, it's a very simple way to engage and converse with the people who live in your city. And especially right now, in the time of a pandemic, it seems to be common sense to me that it be okay. We want people to be engaged. Part of what's wrong right now in our world is that we make it so hard for people to be engaged in our political system. So I'm all for making it easier.
Your point is taken. I would just point out that this addresses public facilities, so private. This has nothing to do with folks meeting outside on private land.
No, but at a park,
Right.
at a city park. So that would be what I'm, right?
If you arrange to have someone there, it'd fall under this.
Right.
Yep.
Mayor?
And to that point, it does make for an uneven playing field because you could do that as an elected official. You could have office hours and say, please come out and discuss issues of the day. That would be allowed, correct?
Right.
It's not campaigning, it's
Right.
just doing your job.
Okay, so that's kind of, it's like you never know what you're, but I asked about that. I thought I did. Maybe I didn't ask it clearly. So, yes, because right now you want to engage with the folks and it's so hard to do safely and places don't necessarily want you at their businesses and people don't want to come to a house with 3 kids and 2 dogs. So I'm all for people being able to engage safely.
Councilor Harding?
So, yeah, I want people to be able to engage throughout our, election season. So I would just say, let's just open it up for a time period right now and reevaluate if we want to close it down after the election season.
Do you want me to reread the suggestion that I had made?
Yeah, that would be fine. I would be open to that.
Is that all
What's
right?
the motion? Yeah.
What I was recommending was adding C, that simply said city parks are allowed for political campaign purposes from, say, August 10th to November 10th, from noon to 8 p.m. That we were setting a set period of time and not too late at night or too early in the morning, that it would negatively affect the neighborhoods.
I like it. I think 2 things that I would like personally would be if we extended it actually till December 1st in case of if there are some runoffs. That way we wouldn't have to revisit it before the runoffs. And the other thing would be putting a clause where we would do it till December 1st of 2021, and then if we wanted to do it again, we could look at it again next year. Does that make sense? In other words, it wouldn't be set in stone forever, right?
Well, I would think you would just go back and remove it
Yeah.
if it was a problem.
So that's not quite, it's not a motion yet, but we're kind of working out what that motion might look like. So I'm seeing August 10th to the runoff date, so December 2nd for this year. Is it 2 to 8 p.m.?
Yeah, I just said noon to 8, but I
Noon
don't
to
care.
8. Okay, I'm sorry, I misheard that. And then, do we want to limit that to certain parks or all parks available?
I say any city park.
Any
Yep.
park, okay. And is there consensus for that, to any park? And then, the other question I had is would we still require some sort of an event permit so that we can be sure it's reserved for them? Because if somebody else comes in with an event permit, they're going to override them.
I would assume that those permits would still apply. You'd still have to get a permit if you wanted a shelter. Yeah,
Right, for a public event, right.
yeah.
And this, I assume this constitutes a public event, so the permit process would be in place to reserve the shelter.
Yeah. What would council think about us coming up with a express permit, kind of like we have for the block parties, so that can be approved within 7 days? And it doesn't, I think the regular event permit process is something like 60 days. So just to get it through faster, and as long as they're not requiring porta-johns, they're not doing fireworks, all the stuff that you have to normally fill out for an event permit, we could do a one-pager for them to fill out quickly.
Well, generally, if you wanted to reserve a permit for a shelter, you can just go down to the park department, or, the rec center, and you get that same
Okay.
day.
So
I don't know
you're
why
just
checking.
reserving the shelter, you're not hosting an event.
So that's not a public event, so you're talking about I want to make sure I understand the question. So if I'm going to just reserve a shelter for a family picnic, I just reserve the shelter. It's not a public event. I don't need a permit to do that.
Yeah, I think you do if you want the shelter, like at Pfeiffer Park. You have to go down to the Park and Rec Commission. I believe you pay a $25 fee for it.
You do the rental fee agreement, yes, for the shelter. You're right.
And that's just first come, first serve.
Yep.
There's
Yeah.
no time requirement for it. So we could go that route. Waive the fee, or still charge $25.
I think the law says that you treat them as you do other members of the public if you're going to open up for campaign purposes. So it'd be the same across the board.
All right.
My only concern about the express permit would be if it is a large event, you may want public safety involved and maybe even public works to have a look at this. I don't do these permit applications, but
Well, Kevin, one of the things I just wanted to clarify is you used the example of, a private party. If this is using a park shelter and you're going to invite the public, I would assume they would have to fill out a special event permit.
I agree.
Now, back to the mayor's point, if we want that permit process to be a shorter process, like we do the neighborhood block parties, we could do that. And as part of that express permit right now, I believe public safety and public works are involved in that loop right now, even in the express
Okay.
permit.
And they give us a number, estimated number, or not with that process, the block party?
I think,
there's not a
not on the
number
block
count
party
on it.
one, they don't. On the full special event permit process, they do have like estimated attendance.
That might be something we want to add to this particular type of express, just to get some idea of the numbers. I'm thinking national campaigns, for instance.
All right. How's council, what's the consensus on that? Sounds like we might have to go that route of an express permit because of the requirements. It's not as simple as a shelter reservation.
I'm okay with that. I still think we should just personally, I'm open to talk about it more, but for this event, for this season, just let's cap it at December 2nd, and then let's talk about whether we really want to open this up for the national scene, because if we open this door, it's going to happen. You're going to have huge rallies at these parks, and you're going to have citizens that are going to like it, and you're going to have citizens that are very angry, and you're going to have parents that are angry because they can't take their kids to the park that day, or they show up, or it could cause a nightmare. I'm open to talk about it, but I just personally think it'd be safer to cap it at December 2nd, and then let's relook at it to see if we want to add it again for next year and stuff.
Mayor,
Yes, Councilor.
there's no way by ordinance to allow this only for local elections or local campaigns.
I'd be real concerned about equal protection problems there.
Councilor.
To make it real simple then, how about just say, change it to C, city parks are allowed for political campaign purposes from August 10th to December 2nd from noon to 8 p.m. due to COVID. That way you've got a time limit. If there's no COVID, then they're not allowed.
What if we say instead of due to COVID, during the COVID?
Okay.
Or while the pandemic is around?
But then that gets into
Wordsmith it.
I know, right?
interpretation of when is COVID here,
Yeah,
when's it
when's-
finally past us.
Yeah.
But understood that the intent behind it would be to help with the COVID situation. But remember, council could come back in and just change it whenever it wishes. It doesn't have to be tied to anything necessarily for now.
Yeah, we can just revisit it later without
Right.
ever mentioning COVID.
And that's really all I want, is just us to put a date on revisiting it, because I just get scared that we're visiting so much stuff that we just won't put a date on it. And then before we know it, we'll have all these huge rallies.
But is what you're saying that we'll revisit it if we have to revisit it? And when we say we don't put a date on it? Like, we can always take it back if it becomes a problem, right? I understand the
Correct.
concern wholeheartedly, and I don't want people to have bad experiences in their neighborhood, but it might not happen at all. And my main concern is that folks are able to engage and learn and become involved if they so wish, which right now I feel like that's a big wish, to have more people involved.
Let's just move to suspend number 11 for the rest of the year.
That's not what's under discussion, though. If you could motion it, do you want
It's a possibility, because that's what we're talking about exactly. You're wanting to amend onto it, I'm saying we could suspend the whole thing for the rest of the year.
That also opens up the use of building and facilities, community center and such, and for me personally, I think the parks are okay, but I don't want to see it in our city buildings.
I agree.
Unless council feels it's too late, it could be a goal-setting topic, 'cause I hate to push everything to goal-setting, but
well, it could still be a goal-setting topic.
Yeah,
after
we could
make our
start it now
decision
and-
here, and then just
It's
bring it up
fine.
again. So, do we, for integrity's sake here, do we need to have a motion to make a change?
We-
Okay, so
We're in a motion, correct?
we had a discussion, but I don't know if it was actually motioned out. Do you recall a motion and a second? I think we were just in discussion.
Thought I motioned it and you
Yeah.
seconded
Okay,
it.
motion and seconded, all right.
Yep.
And that, can you repeat the
No.
motion?
No, that was the other one.
Okay, I'll make a motion.
Okay,
that
great.
We amend rule number 11 by adding a C, in which we say city parks are allowed for political campaign purposes from August 10th to December 2nd, from noon to 8 p.m.
Second.
Second.
Okay, motion and seconded. Further discussion, we noted, well, just, we noted the event permit requirement for that. Does that need to be included in the motion, or is that just a matter of course that it's
It's a matter
already
of course.
required? Okay. So, Councilmember Dara?
I find it regrettable we're having this discussion at all. These kinds of things have happened in Cedar Falls for as long as I've been here. I understand we have to have things in place for when things get out of hand. But this discussion, in my mind, is out of hand. I get it, we're gonna do it, and we have to have some guidelines, I get that, but unless we have a gathering that requires police protection or massive cleanup or setup, I agree with Dave that our country is built on the public square, and this is all we're doing is trying to allow people with good intentions who want to share their thoughts with the community to have an opportunity to have an open meeting. I know you got to have rules, so I think it's good to have these guidelines if things get out of hand, but I've never known anything get out of hand. So anyway, I had to make my editorial comment. I appreciate Susan's reasonable recommendation.
Okay, so it's been motion and seconded. Any other discussion? So all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so the next step is going to be getting that changed in the admin policy 7. There's no resolution required for a meeting or anything like that. So,
Once I make the change, I'll provide copies to the council if that's acceptable. And the
Okay.
mayor, of course.
yep. And then first thing tomorrow, we'll work on that express permit so that it doesn't take long to fill out, and it should be ready by tomorrow afternoon for people to use.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, and our last discussion tonight is number 3, wastewater facility project and the use of ARPA funds. We have 45 minutes set for that. Hopefully we can do that in 35 minutes so we can stay on our council time. And then this is from City Administrator Ron Gaines, so the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. This is typically topics that we would bring forward to goal setting, but because of the timeliness issue, we really need to move forward with some of these conversations now. What we're here to talk about today is our American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA is the acronym, and our nutrient reduction strategy plan moving forward. So I will just kind of hit on, this is really our presentation outline today. Our outline is a little bit chunky, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily go smoothly, and really that's because of the 3 topics that we have. If you look at the American Rescue Plan Act, it's going to be going over the payments, the reporting, and what our recommendation is with regard to the ARPA funds. It's no secret that staff's going to be recommending sanitary sewer and stormwater as where we spend those funds. And then really after that topic, we have to change our focus and look at our nutrient reduction strategy. Our nutrient reduction strategy as we're moving forward is going to be the biological nutrient removal, BNR. You may hear that. And we'll look at the treatment facility for the upgrades and the schedule, construction schedule, and some costs. But then again, changing our subject or changing our focus really to the sewer rate and the financing and how we'll generate the revenue for looking at the revenue for our upgrades to our treatment facility. So, and knowing that our study is going to outline that we're actually an enterprise fund when you start looking at those, and I'll explain, get into that a little bit later when we go. It's going to be a lot of information, and as the mayor said, I'm going to try to go through it quickly. So again, here we are, the American Plan Act, or American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds that we're moving forward with. So let's just start. As many of you know or have heard, and it's been widely reported, that the city of Cedar Falls is going to receive about $6.5 million in ARPA funds. Our staff, our financial staff has been working with the Treasury Department on a number of the rules and some of those things, but here lately they've been working to receive our first $3.25 million of those dollars. And approximately a year later, in August or September of next year, we're anticipating that we would receive the second portion of that $3.25 million. So as with any of our dollars that we have spending requirements that we'll have to look at, and other requirements we'll go through as we continue through the program here. But our funds must be, the spending requirements in this particular case, our funds must be encumbered by December 31st of 2024. And I know I can anticipate some of the questions right now being, what does encumbered mean? And as we know, and through the information that we've got from the Treasury Department at this point, is encumbered could mean identified in our CIP process and in our budget process. So once those are encumbered, we have to move forward with actually getting those dollars spent by December 31st of 2026. So that seems like a long time out, but when we start looking at identifying projects and moving forward, that time will come very quickly. And then from there on out, we'll have quarterly reports that we'll have to submit on how we're expending and using our funds. So I'll jump in right now to some additional guidelines that have been put forward by the Treasury Department, and those are allowable uses. These, what you see before you are really right straight out of the guidelines for the ARPA funds. I'll go down through these bullet points rather quickly. Response to the public health emergency. The city itself has not really had a lot of monies that have been expended with regard to the public health emergencies, and any of those that we've had other revenue sources to offset those costs. Or its negative economic impacts. Those economic impacts we're assuming are from the private sector, and do we want to put together a plan that would help offset some of the private businesses? Now, again, we're receiving only about $6.5 million. If we're like some of the other communities where we're getting 20, 30, 40 million, this may be an opportunity to do that, but 6.5 really isn't going to go very far. Premium pay for essential workers. The city has not encumbered any premium pay situations. Next bullet point is replace public sector revenue loss. So as we've reported on periodically with our revenue losses, really our three big funds we would look at is our road use tax, local option sales tax, and visitors and tourism. With our road use tax, we've actually been trending at or slightly above our pre-pandemic numbers. Local option sales tax, we've actually been tracking quite a bit ahead of pre-pandemic numbers. And visitors and tourism was initially estimated that we'd be about 50% of pre-pandemic numbers, but we've been actually tracking quite a bit higher. We're not up to pre-pandemic numbers, but we're getting very close. So as we move on to the next bullet point, we're talking about broadband and water. Broadband is really a focus of the administration and even our governor's administration, but broadband in Cedar Falls is very good. We talk about water, that is managed by our Cedar Falls utilities. And so on to sanitary sewer, which includes stormwater, as identified by these ARPA funds, and really that's the staff's recommendation to expend this $6.5 million. Real quickly run into non-allowable uses, reduce tax revenue. By reducing tax revenue, that basically says, hey, we're going to take this $6.5 million, put it into the general fund, and lower property taxes by that. That's a non-allowable use. Payments to pensions funds, obviously just what it says, non-allowable use. Any debt or service payoff, any bonds that we would have out there, we cannot use this monies for that. Legal settlements is also a non-allowable use. And deposits into rainy day funds or any type of cash reserves would also be non-allowable uses. So it was a couple of months ago, Mayor Green set up a meeting between the governor's office, and Jennifer Rodenbeck and I were both there, and we started talking about what the uses for this money can be, and also started talking about the governor in the state of Iowa received about $1.2 billion with regard to the ARPA funds. So with regard to that $1.2 billion, the state of Iowa is under the same restrictions or guidelines that we just went through up there. Governor Reynolds is looking at what are other communities looking for to help spend this $1.2 billion in regard to the confines of what we have here. It's my understanding that the governor's office is strongly looking at broadband across the state of Iowa into the rural areas, which is a fantastic use, but she's also looking at creating pots of money for sanitary sewer, water, stormwater, those type of funds as well. So we're trying to position ourselves by using our ARPA funds for that, for our wastewater and stormwater, to also hopefully apply for grant opportunities for this $1.2 billion. So just real quickly, this is our ARPA portion of the conversation, and before I move on to our nutrient reduction strategy, maybe I'd stop here and for any questions with regard to ARPA.
Yes, Councilor Sires.
Oh, it got pushed off. It's always on my mind, that street to Aldrich School. And the reason it is because when I look out my front window, that's what I see is Aldrich School, even though it's about a half mile away. could we use that money to get a street to that school as opposed to just put it into our wastewater plant,
So
which we're going to have to spend and fund anyway?
that's actually a great question, and our staff has sat through many webinars with regard to the ARPA and the rules and some of those, and it's not just asked once, it's asked several times in different ways through these webinars. Can we use it for other infrastructure? Can we use it for streets? Can we use it for buildings? Can we use it for pools? Whatever the case is, and the answer is solidly no. It is really a narrow legislation and a narrow funding source that these are the allowable uses. So unfortunately, we cannot. I know that's not the answer you wanted to hear.
No, that wasn't the answer I wanted. Could we switch over the money for the remodel to that? No, that was my question.
And also note, in the Iowa Mayors Association conference last week, we had a talk with the mayors, and the majority of cities represented there were using it for wastewater treatment. So it's a very common, easy fund because it's got to be spent anyway.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilor Cruz.
Along Councilman Sires' comment or question, could you use it for the storms, or not storm sewer, sanitary sewer for a street out there to the school? Just that component, because it then collects into...
Yes, actually, you could. And we're going to, a little bit later in the presentation here, I'm going to identify some other funding sources. But that's a really good question when it goes back to the enterprise funds, because as it really doesn't matter which sanitary sewer project you assign it to, because it all comes out of the same fund with regard to that.
Wastewater.
Yes.
From the whole city, so. Okay.
So.
Yes, Councilor Miller.
Encumbered, can you go back to your interpretation of what that is? It said encumbered by December of '24?
So right now, we understand encumbered would mean, so it's assigned, for instance, in a CIP and a budget. So if the council's approved a capital improvements program or a budget that is assigning those monies, then that would, it's my understanding, would meet the interpretation of encumbered.
So if that happens for us by the end of this year, through goal setting or whatever, and when the new CIP comes out, then those monies can be spent accordingly?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, Councilor Dunn.
So, first, thank you. When I read the words American Rescue Plan Act, obviously I know the importance of sewer and water and all those things. So I appreciate the use for those expenses. But I think about what has occurred in the past year and a half because of this pandemic, and what are we truly suffering with right now in the Cedar Valley. I don't know that the problem started with the pandemic, but I believe it's worsened during the pandemic. We have been in a childcare or quality childcare desert for many years, and I believe that has worsened. I wonder if these monies could be used citing the negative economic impacts, and I'm not obviously expecting the whole $6.5 million to go to something like this, but it would be nice to know that at least some of that money went to help folks in our city, namely children and their parents. It would help them get back to work. Obviously, if somebody is not able to get quality childcare, they're not to be able to go be the employee that so many businesses are needing. That often causes stress, and mental health suffers in those families and in those businesses where people are working shorthanded. I just wonder if there can be a conversation amongst council, and I apologize, I know Waterloo is doing something similar. I have the document that was given by council to their staff. I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm just hoping we can hopefully have a conversation about possible other uses for at least some of the money to help folks in our community.
I think there's an opportunity outside of these monies to actually talk about some of those child care and some public-private partnerships that we can go with regard to those programs and I would hope that we could have a bigger conversation. Unfortunately, I don't know if those are going to be able to fall into this narrow guideline that's there. And then what is, and if we're using the ARPA funds, what are the backup funds to sustain that type of a program? So I think there are other funding sources that we can get to. It's just, I don't know that we can sustain that through this program.
I've got a question too. I'm kind of with Kelly as far as wanting to make sure that we're taking care of people that were impacted by this. What kind of discussion did you have around that number one, that first option, public health emergency and negative impact on negative economic impact? But I'm just kind of curious how that conversation went.
Well, as we really didn't have a big conversation with regard to community-wide. We know that some communities, and I'll pull out my cheat sheet here, but I know like a Cedar Rapids that's receiving $28 million. They had a public information meeting where they actually looked at what are they going to use their funds for, and $28 million is a significant amount. Not with that we're scoffing at the 6.5. But it's a significant amount when you go into looking at negative impacts and some of those things. One of the things that really became kind of a challenge for us is as we started talking to the Treasury Department with regard to how to spend that money in that, when you start to look at what type of a public program can you put together, Treasury Departments throw it back on cities, back to say, hey, you have to develop your rules, you're going to have to develop the type of rules that you're going to have and what the criteria is to meet the threshold to receive those public funds. So again, for $6.5 million, which if you look across the city of Cedar Falls, it doesn't really make a large impact as you're spreading it across all of the different businesses, whereas as we look at the $6.5 million and you're putting that in storm sewer and sanitary sewer, you're impacting each and every user in the city, whether it's a residential or commercial or a nonprofit, all of those benefit equally from that $6.5 million.
Councilor Hyde?
I'm not as familiar with the exact guidelines, but is it even open to say just take all the citizens get their share of that? Is that, or that's not allowed under ARPA funds?
I have not heard any guidelines that would allow us to just give a stipend to everybody. Take 40,000 people and divide by 6.5. No, 6.5 million. I mean, we can actually check into that, but I don't know that that's going to.
Can you pull up the sheet again with the numbers? The reason I asked was the language of number one. I wanted to go back to that one. The public health emergency. Is it not up there? Sorry, there it is. So response to public health emergency. Now, I know that's like a big, let's just split it up, but that is a response, and it is to the public health emergency. I know that's kind of broad, but is there any way we could look in and make sure that's not available? I mean, I'm just curious.
We can, but what I fear is we're going to have to try to figure out how each and every recipient was affected negatively for a public health emergency.
In order to turn that in order
to receive those funds.
To qualify? Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so no other questions? You want to move forward on the nutrient reduction strategy?
Did the school district get money, or is it just cities that get?
I know that it's mainly this is focused on the cities. I don't know how the schools are receiving some of their funding.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so if you'd like to now continue forward with the nutrient reduction strategy.
Thank you, Mayor. So now, as I mentioned earlier, we're really going to have to kind of change our focus away from the ARPA funds and start looking, talking about our nutrient reduction strategy. And again, Remember, this goes back to goal setting of last year. We talked about a regional plan, regional wastewater treatment facility. And what the council decided as just a general term of economics is that we are going to upgrade our existing facility here. And that was really just, again, like I said, it was a financial decision with regard to this particular nutrient reduction strategy is going to be a $112 million adventure for us. And if we looked at regional, it was going to be in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 times that. So we're looking at $200 to $300 million to do that. So the council by consensus looked at moving forward with regard to upgrading our treatment facility. So make sure I'm moving the right direction here. So there's a lot of questions that always come up of, well, why is the city required, or why is the city looking at updating our treatment facility and our sanitary sewer facility? And I'll just, for the sake of everyone, kind of go over the process. So the federal government, through the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, really dictates what those requirements are going to be. And the EPA then indicates through the state's DNR, and in our case, the Iowa DNR, what our requirements will be with regard to nutrient removal or nutrient reduction. In this particular case, we're looking at the reduction of nitrogen and phosphorus coming out of the effluent in our treatment facility. Well, we're required right now to submit a plan to the Iowa DNR, and an updated plan on our nutrient reduction strategy. And that report has got to include a number of things, but primarily, what is our nutrient reduction strategy going to be? And so, so let's discuss our current plant. And so our current plant is a trickling filter system that's a little bit old and outdated technology. As we look at across the state of Iowa, there's only 2 other communities that have that. We're the third. It's Council Bluffs and Ames. And both of those plants that are trickling filter are looking at transitioning to more conventional. And it just so happens that they're looking at the biological nutrient removal as well. So all 3 of our plants will look at moving into that biological removal. One of the things that's interesting is our staff has done a great job working with our consultant and going through the different technologies and what we could upgrade that particular plant to. We've looked at the aerobic granular sludge. We've also looked at a couple membrane reactor type of technologies. One was an aerated biofilm, and the other was just a biofilm type of science, and then also an algae system. So where we landed with regard to the flexible for our future needs and what accommodates our existing space within our plant is really the biological nutrient removal, or the BNR science that we're looking at moving forward with. So I know that unless you're a nerdy wastewater geek, that doesn't mean a lot, but maybe what I can do is fast forward here. And this slide is really a 10,000-foot look at what the improvements will need to be to convert our plant from a trickling filter to a BNR system. And our consultants are looking at this, and we haven't started design, but really what you're looking at here is a number of things that are going to happen with regard to construction of new facilities, construction of modifying facilities. We have a number of facilities that will be needed for demolition to make room for upcoming buildings and technology. Also, probably the biggest part of this whole thing is going to be the design and the staging, because what we're looking at is a process over a 3-year construction time period. We're going to have to move our plant from a trickling filter to a BNR system, and we'll have 40,000 users that'll wake up every morning, turn their sink on, flush their toilets, that still are going to this plant, and we'll still have to be cleaning that water before we release that effluent. So the staging is going to be a big, big deal as it comes to the plant upgrade. So let's talk a little bit about the construction staging or construction timeline, and also our estimated project cost. Again, we're looking at a $112 million project, and this project is really going to start in 2023 as we start the design contract, which is going to be an estimated $12 to $18 million, not knowing the exact where we'll fall. A design is expected to take 1.5 to 2 years, and following that, we'll be at a 2026 construction start, hoping to get done by that 2030 time period that the EPA is looking at. So our staff has been working with the DNR with all of this just to give them a headline of where we're going. They're very supportive of our timeline, and also the draft report that we have going for them. So, and again, we've shared this with the governor's staff and their office as well. So I think, Mayor, that might be another good time as we talk about the type of science, the project and schedule to go ahead and ask any questions. Or
Okay, so I'll open the floor for council questions. Seeing none.
nobody wants to talk about the dirty water.
Mayor,
Yes, Councilor Miller.
for the ARPA fund, or excuse me, for the ARPA funds, the plan needs to, we have to have a plan in place by when? As to how?
So we have to submit a plan to the Iowa DNR, and really I'm going to get into that in some of the next slides, but we're going to have to submit a plan to the Iowa DNR that's going to outline what we're doing, the type of strategy, reduction strategy. It's going to ask what our funding source, the price, all of those things by the end of this year.
Sure, and I understand that, but just in terms of the ARPA funds, do we have to submit something back to the state as to how we intend to use those, and when does that need to be done by?
Well, that'll be that encumbered portion, but as we start looking at the state, when we start wanting to use these dollars or try to get some of the $1.2 billion that the state has, it's going to be very hard to say, hey, we would like to use some of your funding, but we didn't use ours for wastewater. We used ours for something else. So that's another reason that we strongly believe that the 6.5 should be used in the sanitary sewer and stormwater funds.
Sure. I guess my intent was, going back to Councilwoman Dunn's point, was if you were to say we're going to throw $6.2 million towards the sanitary sewer, and then have a conversation at goal setting to see if we can actually get some of those funds into child care facilities or mental health facilities, is that an option?
I think it could be an option, but I guess I would argue, and not knowing that that's the direction of this particular meeting tonight, and maybe have to do a little bit more research, but I would think that we have other funding sources that we could put into some of those particular programs.
Okay.
Can I just ask, what if we didn't, say this money didn't exist? I guess since this money exists and we plan on possibly using it the way that's being proposed, do we know the savings to the taxpayer because of this money, if we used it in this way, versus if it didn't exist or we used it in a different way? Do we know that number? Or could we know that number?
So I'm not sure I understand your question, but really the savings to the taxpayer or the user in this particular case, if we're using it for sanitary sewer, is going to be $6.5 million plus whatever the interest rate on the bonds that we would have to sell to use this monies.
Okay, if this money didn't, because obviously this money exists because of the pandemic, and am I correct in thinking that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if this money didn't exist, would there have to be a raise in taxes, or how would we have funded this if this money didn't exist?
So the next part of the presentation is actually going to get into a little bit of that on where we, our finance staff, along with some others, did a study on what the rates should be. And so those rates and where our revenue fund is really through the users. And so, but since I've been here, this is really how we've accumulated monies to do projects like this. Is you end up with, like, this would be about 5 to 6% of the project, and then we're looking at other funding sources to come up with those other 95% of the project. So some of that we'll have to bond for and we'll have to use for revenues, but we're also going to look at every other source that we can. So it would reduce the user rate.
Quick question.
Yes,
So
Marty, go ahead.
back to Councilmember Miller's question. So we're kind of working with two things right now. We have to turn in the funding source to the Iowa DNR by the end of the year, correct?
Yes.
And what upgrades, we're going to submit that. And then we have to submit how we're going to use the ARPA funds to the state at a different time?
So the ARPA funds would need to be encumbered
By
that 2024.
24.
By the
Okay.
end of 2024.
Okay. I think.
That's why all these things are kind of meshy.
Yeah, and I'm just making sure I'm clear on that. I think that this is a good use of some of the funds for sure, possibly all the funds. I would, however, maybe like to request as well, like, is there a program that we could start, with some of the money that we could talk about at goal setting maybe? Just because it's tough out there for some people right now, and I know while it's going to save them money to use this money for the sanitary sewer. I get that, but is there another way we can make a direct impact? I don't know if obviously a couple other council members feel that way, but maybe some options. Let's spend a little time on it, possibly, if we can get a consensus for that. What are our other options if it involves starting a program, for mental health or child care or something like that?
Sure.
Okay, so for tonight, yeah, any other comments?
Well,
Councilor Wiedemer?
just that by using it for the sewer fund, it actually is impacting all the citizens of Cedar Falls. You're not picking winners or losers, you're actually impacting everyone.
I agree, and I think it's a good use of the funds, and I just think, can we use 5 million and then possibly do something with the other million? And maybe the answer is no, it wouldn't work out. We could do this or this. I just would hate to not possibly explore the opportunity of using some of the funds in some way. And in that way, maybe everybody would benefit from 6 million or 5.5 million, and then the people that really suffered could also get something out of it, because I know there are some people that are hurting. So I just want to look at the possibility, that's all. If it's possible, what could we do? What's within the realm of possibility? That's all.
Okay. We'll have Mr. Gaines go into the next part of the presentation, which I think will answer some of that question about how it affects everybody.
Thank you, Mayor. So again, we're going to change focus and really look at the next part of this is the sewer rate financing study that went on that our staff looked at. So again, maybe I'll just give kind of a highlight over here. So when we submit the nutrient reduction strategy to the Iowa DNR, which is the biological nutrient removal, there's really 4 components that they're going to ask for in there, and I'm kind of dumbing it down a little bit or simplifying it. It's what is the nutrient reduction strategy? Obviously, we identified that as our biological nutrient removal, which will reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus. And again, the Iowa DNR is very supportive. Also, what's the schedule? We talked about that. Design in 2023, construction being completed hopefully by 2029. And what's the cost? The cost obviously is $112 million. So again, 6.5 is only about 5% of that, and we'll have to make it up somewhere else. And then this portion of the presentation is really, and how are we going to pay for it? So I want to touch on, again, the enterprise funds and where we are with regard to enterprise funds. So with the sewer is an enterprise fund, and what that means basically is all of the operation maintenance costs is really going to have to be captured by the user fees, and that's by state code. So it's very similar to a private business, where if you have a private business and you have overhead and you have employees and all of those things, what you have to do is you have to recoup that through your goods and services fees that you do. That's very similar to what the enterprise fund would be. So as you look on here, there's the purpose of the study and increases in operating and including the annual cost and some of those. That's all of the information that we're actually going to be looking at with regard to what's the necessary revenue stream, which is captured through user fees. So looking up there, you can see since fiscal year 12, there's been a constant increase in user rates. And those rates have gone up from 5% to 9% to down to 5%. We are in our last year of the 3-year increase of 3%. Now, what I can tell you is about 10 or 12 years ago, we had a disinfection project that we had to do down at the wastewater treatment facility. Those dollars were about $20 million. And as we were going through that, we were looking at that and also looking forward, knowing the nutrient reduction was going to happen. And so these increases have also started to accumulate dollars so we can have a revenue stream that pays for this particular increase that we're going to have. So looking at the operating cost and maintenance cost and small project costs that we have with regard to our sanitary sewer fees, these are all of the fees that you see in front of you. Well, we also have a summary of large capital projects that are down here as well, including nutrient removal, Main Street sewer. Nutrient removal, obviously, is the big one, but as Mr. Cruz indicated, is, you know, if there's a sewer, we can actually include it. And so Main Street sewer, regardless of what you think of the configuration of the roadway on top of it, the sewer and the storm sewer are going to need to be replaced on Main Street. And this is also a funding source that you can use because, again, all of those sanitary sewer fees are in that, that fund. So. Another project that I wanted to just briefly mention, because we'll be coming back to the council in a couple months here, but the Park Drive second force main is a sanitary sewer that we have up in the North Cedar Heights area. And we have a significant amount of infill and infiltration in that particular neighborhood. We're getting to embark on a pavement management program where we're reconstructing the streets up there, and this is a good time to try to take care of some of that I&I. So we'll be coming back to you with that in the near future. So let's talk a little bit about our current debt that we have with regard to our sanitary sewer. So our current debt, as you can see, 2016, 2018 is about $6 million. Those bonds will be retired in 2028. We also have the state revolving fund, which is just shy of $5 million. Those bonds will be retired in 33. And then we have just under $10 million that's actually identified as internal loans. So what we've had is our capital projects fund and our health trust fund have loaned dollars to the sewer fund and the amount of $10 million, and those will be coming due in 2032. So then we look at the sewer rate study and taking all the information that our finance and our finance folks and our outside financial bond counsel, Public Works, and myself, and coming up with, okay, what should be the sewer rates as we move forward in the next few years? And what we have is proposing a 7% increase for FY23 through FY27. So as you can see, the current figure, total monthly cost is about $40. If you do that 7%, it's just under $3 a year going out to for the 5 years. So that's a significant increase. And again, going back to, if we start taking away that 6.5 million and decreasing that, these numbers probably have to go up for additional revenue inside inside that. So the next question then is typically, how do we compare to other cities? And so the city of Ames typically does a sewer rate study every year, and they'll go over the 43 largest cities. And what they do is city number 1 is not necessarily the good city because that's the highest rate. City 43 is the lowest rate, so the lower you are. If you look on there under the first column, you can see that Cedar Falls ranking is about 25th. We're somewhere in the middle of that. And if you go through each of those 5 years and you look, every year we go up 23, 20, 15, 12, 8th. So then we're the 8th highest. Now put an asterisk by that because that chart is assuming that we do not know that's assuming nobody else raises their rates. So that's at today's current rates. So we know that as you get into the further years, it's really not going to be accurate because these other communities are under the same regulations that we are moving forward with those rates. So we're estimating that we're probably going to be somewhere around 25th to 20th at the 5th year. But again, there's no way to really know that until you know what the other communities raise in their rates. So Mayor, what I have is I have 2 slides really in conclusion. I'll try to go through these. Again, staff's recommending the $6.5 million in ARPA funds for sanitary and storm infrastructure. Those ARPA funds then can be or help to reduce residential, commercial, industrial, nonprofits in that enterprise fund. Also, the rate increases of potentially 7% for the next 5 years, and we'll continue to seek out other funding sources with ARPA, whether it's the state or the federal or other funding sources just in general. And again, we believe that using those ARPA funds in sanitary sewer and using it for sanitary sewer, it better positions us for looking at the state funds as they will be available. We have 2 motions for you tonight, and you can consider those. Again, the first one is including in sanitary and storm water infrastructure, and the second is directing staff to establish a sanitary sewer rate increase of 7% for the next 5 years. So one thing that I want to say is even if both of these motions pass tonight in directing staff at what to do, all of these things will come back in front of you. So for instance, we're going to have a goal setting session where we can talk about some of the ARPA funds and some of the programs that have been identified here and what we can do with some other funding sources. And then, so they'll come back to you in front of you with the CIP and the budget and some of those areas to look at. The other is obviously if we're creating an ordinance for sanitary sewer rate increases, that would come back to you as well. So that information would be. So just kind of some closing comments that I have for everyone. These projects are obviously very, very difficult. As we talk, they're never fun discussing and planning a $112 million project that needs to be done. It's not one of the fun projects or the exciting projects, but this is a project that needs to be done. And it's never easy, as we discuss, raising user rates. It's always a difficult conversation. But I think our staff has been really diligent working with the Iowa DNR, puts us in a much better position to determine our own destiny as it comes to this sanitary sewer project. These are the type of projects that if we delay and kick down the road, we're going to find ourselves probably ending up in a consent decree negotiation with the Department of Justice, the EPA, and the Iowa DNR, like other communities have recently. So with that, Mayor, I can take any additional questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. Any questions? Councilmember DeBoer?
Does your sewer rate study rate comparison already include the 6.5 ARPA funds, or is that factoring in without it? What I'm wondering is if it's not in there, does that mean that by putting it in, we might not have to take the 7th year or the 4th year?
So the 6.5 is already included in the 7%, correct?
And if it was not included in there, that number, I assume, then would have to be even higher?
Yes. That I don't know that we've fully calculated that out, but you're looking at 5% of a large project. So.
Any other final questions? All right, Denny, if you wouldn't mind putting the motions back up. like to do the second one first. So a motion for staff to begin drafting an ordinance to establish a sanitary sewer rate increase of 7% over the next 5 years. Is there a motion for
So
that?
moved.
Second.
The motion and seconded. Any discussion continuing on that? And seeing none, then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, and then to the first one, they're asking for a motion to approve the use of ARPA funds as presented tonight, which includes sanitary and stormwater infrastructure.
I'd like to make that motion.
So it's been motioned. And there's a second, open for discussion. Okay. So all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so that passes also. And that concludes our agenda for tonight in Committee of the Whole. For entertaining a motion to adjourn, just want to let folks know, we'll begin at a little after 7 o'clock, so 7:05, just so Denny can start. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So
Motion seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.